Gives me great pleasure to introduce Alyssa Fenoglio, who is here with me today. It's another Friday. I think when we did Michael's one, it was also a Friday. So Friday seems to be a great time to catch pharma leaders on a podcast. So guys, please do make a note. I'm thrilled that you've decided to join me today. And from what I've seen very quickly on social media, this is the one people have been really looking forward to this whole week. So without sort of any further ado, I'm going to pass over to you to introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Gaurav, and happy Friday. It's a good day for a podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so nice to meet everyone. I'm Alyssa Fenoglio. I am the founder and strategic advisor of the 𝘊𝘰𝘯𝘵, and also a former executive in the pharma industry. I have worked across companies like Teva, Sanofi, and device like Medtronic and Abbott, as well as Procter & Gamble. I'm really passionate about empowering people to take control of their health. And so that's why I'm in the industry. And so looking forward to unpacking many of the questions that we saw in the poll today, Gaurav. So we posted a poll because we wanted to hear from you. This is for your audience. And we asked you what topics you wanted to hear about from Gaurav and I today. And there were four that we listed as options. One was the human side of AI, which is a personal favorite, leadership to inspire change, earning trust in a digital world, and turning ideas into action. And you know, the results were pretty good. We had over 20 votes, lots of additional questions in the comments, but the lead in the poll with 43% was earning trust in a digital world. It's something every industry is struggling with, including pharma. And then the other three actually tied for second.
Which is insane, right? So everybody wants to know about everything, but we've got a limited amount of time. And I think the one bit that you just said there that really stood out to me is about trust. This is something that's developing more and more in a lot of the conversations we have. We've always had this piece around, do we really trust the AI? Do we really trust the process, the governance, and the things that are being put in place right now? Or is it a bit of a Wild West in terms of what things are going on? I know you're at that cutting edge in terms of understanding this. I know that from your international speaking trail that we've jointly shared. I've been lucky enough to be at those events with you. The key thing here is just to make sure that everyone understands that we're all on this journey together. I hate to even say there's a pharma AI expert in the world right now. There isn't. Like, we're all on this journey. Trust is a massive part of that equation. And I think that's a really great place to sort of start this discussion and, your thoughts on it. Because from what I heard from you in, what was it now, May at the Next Pharma Summit, there was a real appetite from the audience. And I think you're one of the top one or two. I can't remember between you and Michael, who was one in first and second best presentations of those events.
We co-won it, Gaurav. So we have to give a shout out to Michael. We co-won.
Co-won it. There's another tie, guys. There's another tie.
Yeah, it was a tie.
So,
it was a tie.
What I would love to do is just maybe a little bit of a recap from your perspective as to how you cover trust in that equation. And then from the poll, what do you sort of, want to answer to the people that have asked those questions?
Yeah, trust is a really tough one, and we're all on a learning journey. So I agree with you. There's not one expert. There are people who are more astute in AI, and I listen to a lot of thought leaders myself, outside the industry, inside the industry, to see what's coming next and how do we apply that in healthcare. But there's some interesting stats, right? For me, it always starts with our customer, our consumer, our patient. And some of these stats are US stats, but 70% of Americans have little to no trust in companies to use AI responsibly. And with our AI savvy Americans, 84% are demanding mandatory labeling of GenAI content. So the consumers and the patients and the doctors have spoken, in my mind, right? They want the transparency, and transparency and trust needs to be built in. It's also not only with our external customers. We need to build trust with our internal employees and with our partners, right? So we can kind of unpack some of that, our agencies, our consultancies, and how we're contracting, for example. So I think that the first thing is, in any organization, you need to know what your guidelines are. How are you going to be using AI responsibly? So I always start from the highest level of strategy and then work my way down to practicality. but you need to have a stance for your brand, for your organization, for your function. What will you do? What will you not do? How do you use AI safely? And, typically that occurs in a larger organization with a cross-functional council, including legal, compliance, IT, and functional leaders like commercial, R&D, and manufacturing. And then, of course, that's disseminated in the organization, but that needs to be the starting point. If it's not done, create it yourself for your own team, your own organization, and take that lead. Don't wait for that framework, but just take control. The other thing that's really important within that I see brands struggling with and defining for themselves is you need to have a very clear brand positioning and purpose and values and all of that. And then it makes it really clear what you will or will not do with your brand externally, because you don't want to do anything to damage the trust with your customer. Exactly. And so that's why it's not a one size fits all. It's different for each brand, each drug. It depends, right? What your core values and positioning are. So that's a unique one that needs to be defined. And then you need to make it clear externally. Be radically transparent. Don't hide your AI. AI should be used. Absolutely. That is the way of the future. But just be honest about it. And how you're going to be using it in externally facing communications, especially. And I'm talking more on the commercial side, the R&D side. There's a lot happening over there. I'm not going to get into that with this response, but I think that's really key. And I have a couple examples I could share that might be interesting.
That'd be amazing. But before you move on to those examples, and this is just because you just mentioned R&D, and our good friend Marco Andre. So this is a straight shout out, Marco. I think the next few podcasts you need to make yourself available for this, because he can talk to the R&D piece absolutely now in his new role, right? Because he's taking that commercial angle into R&D, and I'd love to maybe even both of you to have that as a conversation. Wouldn't that be amazing? So yeah, shoot your shot is however I say, even on my own podcast. But absolutely, can I just ask you one question, which was very specifically around the best practice that you've sort of seen in organizations, without naming them necessarily, but that the idea is there a DNA that sort of goes through those organizations that are taking on this factor of trust and AI well?
I think organizations that are more centralized and are more consumer oriented are stronger at this. And unfortunately, that's typically not in pharma, right? So I think if I think to FMCG, where, I've also spent some time, every meeting starts with talking about the consumer. What would the consumer think about this choice, this feature, this benefit, the change of the experience, the channel, the content? I know we're trying to get there in pharma. We've got a great opportunity to level up in that space. But when that's so ingrained in your DNA, it hurts to damage the trust with your consumer, right? And I think frequently in healthcare, we don't think of patients and HCPs as humans. We think of them as the hat they're wearing in the healthcare arena. And I think that is where we need to flip it to: they're humans first, patients and HCPs and pharmacists second. And so damaging trust with a human feels a lot more, it
it's
hurts.
Relatable.
It's relatable. It's like hurting a friend or a family member, a loved one. That's how it feels in FMCG if you damage trust with the consumer. And we need to bring that sense of deep accountability.
This is one for the shorts, 100%. I think so many people, in the highlights reel may miss this, but I really wish that they get this. This is about the patient, and ultimately it's your dad, your mom, your brother, your sister, your best friend, your child, right? Doesn't necessarily matter, right? Or if you're a very good aunt, it's your niece, your nephew, depends on how good they are. But you get my idea that it's just just like 2 bits away from being connected. It's not far for any human being to understand that all of us are going to be patients at some point in our life. So I would love to go back now and have a look at those examples. I think this is great, because you've brought these examples to the fore. It really brings it to life for our audience. So yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Gaurav. Yeah, and I try to bring examples that you may not have seen before. So the first one I love, and I'm back in the US now, and I'm feeling the pain point of having my health records all over the place, all over the world. Mind you, personally, right? That's a pain point for many people. And Estonia, country in Europe, right? That I've had the pleasure of visiting. It's a gorgeous country. They have really set the bar for a digital health experience. They have a digital ID that is connected to everyone's identity in the country, and citizens own their health records. So if they change hospitals, they change doctors' offices, that record is owned by them, and they can decide which of their information is shared with other doctors or people. They can see who's accessed their information. So they're fully in control to get the best healthcare that they need, while being in control of their data. And so I think that's a brilliant example. How do we build more traceability into patient experiences, where we give them a digital and AI informed experience, but they own the data, and there's that transparency throughout. So I hope more European countries, and maybe in the US, doubtful. It's a bit more complex here, but I hope other people pick up that model.
Yeah, let's just look at that in a little bit more detail. I mean, look, there's a lot of noise right now in the UK, specifically around digital IDs. It's something that's being pushed back a little bit, feels a bit Orwellian in terms of, the brave new world, if you like, that we're living in. And I think the way it has been used in Estonia, and I think there's elements of that in the Swiss healthcare system as well, that digital passport to your healthcare is a fantastic idea, right? What I love about the fact that you've mentioned Estonia and not Switzerland is around the resourcing, because this is about, boxing smart with the resources you have. And we already know that Estonia's GDP doesn't comparatively, go with the likes of the US, but they've managed it. And this is what I would love for you to be able to sort of share more from your experiences, where we've got sometimes people, I don't have the budget, or I don't have the time, right? Like this is like the two commonest things. Or sometimes they don't have the capabilities, but that's fine. You can bring that in. Have you got an example in pharma? It doesn't necessarily have to be AI, where you've seen a very focused elite team, like I kind of call that a surgical strike sort of situation, where you've got very good team, and they've managed to execute something like this. Because I find that we can get really heads up in the bureaucracy in pharma. We can go from a workshop to a landscape analysis and we're just like, okay, right, but where's the impact? Where's here you can see that impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a couple examples. I was head of marketing at a digital health startup years ago, so we were quite scrappy and creative. And I do firmly believe that if you have hard points like a low budget, it forces you to be more creative and scrappy and pragmatic. I think my observation in pharma is when you have large budgets, I don't see the level of rigor of strategic decision making and analysis that you should be doing, because you just continue to do what you've always done because you have the budget, or increase it here and increase it here. But when you don't have money, you got to really know where you're playing and how you're winning. And so that laser focused strategic decision making is so critical. It's a skill, and it's forced when you have a low budget. Let me give a pharma example though, and this is one where we'll talk a bit about use cases later. Frequently, these should come out of working with your stakeholders, your brand teams, your GMs, their organizations. What are the pain points that they're trying to solve, and then designing a contract with them on how that should be solved. And then does technology help you solve it in this case? What does success look like? So all of the framing that should go into a case. And then, so this case specifically there were pharmacists that were lower decile in a European country, and they were visited less often than other pharmacists. And so they were going out of stock from time to time, right? And so this was a pain point for this organization. So we had our data science team develop a data science model to address this. And it was personalized. It was using past historical data. It was using lookalike data to develop personalized recommendations for ordering. So then, that doesn't cost a lot, right? We have an in-house team. They built that model. And then we have an in-house agency that then executed that model. They developed the campaign, the content, the creative, the messaging with the link to order with our platforms team. So it was a seamless experience built for one country based on a pain point. Revenue increased with those targeted pharmacists, and customer experience increased. And so then, that's a case that should be scaled, right? And we'll talk about scaling later. But that is a normal pain point for most countries and a scalable use case. It didn't cost a lot of money to execute that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's just when you've got that bit between your teeth, and as a team, you're all kind of high performing and working to that end goal. And when that goal is super clear, you kind of get these amazing outcomes. And this is the stuff that I really want the listeners to take away, right? Which is, even with limited resources, right? Like, you can really make impact. And this is just like one of those sort of examples. I think the other thing that I wanted to sort of delve into with you was from the poll. When we look at those sort of trusts, we had some questions, and I did say on my social media that we would absolutely shout out the people who also asked those questions, so they know that we're answering them in this. Shall we take the first one of those?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Shall we go with the gentleman from Sanofi who has asked that question? And shall we look to address it? First, maybe you, and then I guess from my perspective, I will give my thoughts. Because I always find that it's nice that industry also interacts with this, but also vendors interact with this, and the suppliers and the procurement. As you just said, that entire sort of stakeholder piece is so important. And that's what I love about the fact that even though the poll was like 3 days, not even, like we managed to get such a variety of interest. So one of the bits that I'm really, really interested to hear about is the piece around the discussions that have taken place in the poll. And if you can focus maybe in on the Sanofi question, I'm thinking that we can help answer that for the gentleman.
Yeah. This one's from Michael Damiano from Sanofi. So shout out to Michael.
Shout out,
so
Michael.
I think another Michael. It's
too many Michaels.
yeah, exactly. So I'd say here, right, when I think about use cases, I think first about the customer. So let's take a look at HCPs. 70% of them are digital natives, and half of them are using AI tools independently of their organization. So with or without us or their organization, their hospital telling them to use AI, they're just using it because they're humans. They're like us, and we are using AI ourselves too. And so some of the top use case, let's look at how they're using it naturally. They're transcribing patient notes and other administrative tasks, very similar to what we do in business. They're scanning medical literature, summarizing data points from longer studies, absolutely things that we do too. Aiding diagnosis, there are quite a few examples, especially in radiology, where the augmentation of human and AI looking at scans is improving quality and efficiency and radiology and diagnosis, and that's super exciting. If we catch things early or more accurately, right, we can prevent or extend life. They're actually using it to create patient communications. So just like we might use
that's the big one, right? That's the really big one that everyone's like, I don't have budget to do it in this language or that particular ICP. Well, now you do. So you should be able to execute these.
Exactly. So, just like we may use AI to write an email, a tricky email or a political email, right? So we're doctors. They're doing the same thing. And so, and I think other things like I already mentioned analyzing x-rays and CT scans, but also deeper back and forth brainstorming on aiding diagnosis as well, not just the scans. And so I think they're using it. And then when we look at our consumers, a third of our consumers are using AI for health-related tasks. At least that's probably increased by now. And the top use cases for patients, which are you and I as consumers, researching medical conditions. Who hasn't done that, right? They're switching their Google behavior to AI and LLMs, exploring treatment options. They're looking for doctors, looking at ratings and reviews, and they're scheduling appointments. So very practical use cases that are consumers and doctors are engaging with.
Yeah, and you know what? There's more and more coming out. I'll share a few more with the listeners. Maybe maybe you're not even aware of some of these, but these are interesting. So one of the use cases that kind of started coming out was around ambient voice technology, right? So you were talking about general practitioners. So I was at an event for pharma brands, and this was brought up on stage, right? And this is the same event where Google announced @AlphaFold. So think of that as one end extreme of winning the Nobel Prize with AI, and then kind of coming back down to, I can make a cat, make McDonald's using a video, right? Like, what there's a gap here. But the ambient voice technology was a real use case around the ability of a general practitioner to be able to say the notes so they can have eye contact with the patient, right? It's so simple, but so important, because imagine being unseen when you've got a medical condition, you've gone in to see your general practitioner, and they're too busy just like typing away on the keyboard, wanting to like make notes about your condition. They could just have a normal conversation with you. The ambient voice was capturing it, text to speech, speech to text, however you want to, do it. And that technology is quite old, right? Me and you know this from times when Dragon used to be something we could just talk our university notes into, or whatever, right? Lecture notes into. So the fact that that moved this to AI is incredible, and that's a real use case in the NHS performing, right? This is ambient voice technology, and really worthwhile sort of following this work with Molly. The other thing you mentioned was around the CT scans, I believe, and the X-rays and those things. Well, the biggest idea actually was from Sonny Shergill. When I saw that post, I was so happy from AstraZeneca, right? That they had partnered specifically with 𝘂𝗶𝗹𝘀 for lung cancer, right? Scans and stuff. Again, 5 million bank built up quickly, the understanding of the therapy area, helping more patients. I've worked on IPF, I've worked on COPD. I know what it's like, right, with lung conditions, right? So this was very close to home, but real applications of Gen AI. And I think a lot of pharma companies are using Copilot because they feel it's safe. But you're spot on about the user behavior changing with ChatGPT, because if we look at LLM searches, they're not for one source. They go to Reddit, they go to LinkedIn, they'll go through a whole heap of stuff, because that's the human way of asking it. And now with the Shopify integration, with consumer health especially, there's a massive opportunity for pharma companies that work like Appella or the Haleons of this world to really get on top of this and really understand it, because that's your customer who's changing their behavior and asking to, from search to add a checkout to buy in the same breath.
Yeah. Absolutely. The first use case you mentioned, I love that one on Amgen. And I think it answers there was a recent study earlier this year where it compared doctors and AI with regards to patient preference and engagement. And they actually preferred the AI because it had more empathy. Yeah. And I think one reason is because frequently the, doctors that we've all spoken with, there's too much going on with regards to what they need to document. At the same time, they're trying to listen and have a conversation. So they're distracted by the note taking and the procedures and the process. They can't be with the human. So that Amgen example, I love it because it allows the doctor to be with the human and have that deep listening experience versus taking notes or doing, process and procedure. The other thing that I've seen frequently discussed and being executed is embedding an EHR and medical record, digital medical records, and doing so in a way that's giving hints or recommendations for running different diagnostic screening if someone is showing symptoms. So I do see partnerships with pharma companies and the EHR providers to then improve care, but like earlier in the funnel when they're diagnosis or trying to understand, their condition.
Yeah. So Michael, I think there's quite a few here for you to dig into, and obviously asked Alyssa and myself if you want any more details on these examples. We're more than happy to share in terms of what the situation was and what the results were. I guess it's a good place to stop there for that particular one. But how about what was it Felicia had to say around improving the patient experience and engagement and outcomes? Because this is something that's quite close to your heart as well. From your presentation at Next, I remember seeing that, And I always judge it by the fact that I feel your presentation finished too early, right? Like there's like, oh, you only had like 25 minutes. But yeah, it would be great if you could delve into like Felicia's hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, Felicia Sanborn. So thanks, Felicia, for the question. I kind of answered it a little bit earlier with the other question, but yes, patient experience is so critical. One challenge I'd like to give our industry outside the US is to think more open-minded with how we can engage with the patient outside the US. I think frequently what I hear is we can't do that, or there's too much regulation. There is so much we can do. If we think about someone as a human and their entire wellness, it's not about your drug. It's about everything in their lifestyle, including disease awareness, condition awareness, everything that surrounds the brilliant medication that you are bringing the patient that will improve their life better. So I just think we need to open our minds to that, and in general versus just the drug. I think that's a little bit too single-minded. But again, let's think about how they're using it. How can we meet them there in LLMs when they're looking for information about a condition or a treatment? And we all need to be thinking about the future world of LLM search. And yes, the majority is still using Google. Early adapters are on the LLMs, but it's going to shift over time. And so we need to start putting in place now strategies to make sure that we're showing up properly in the LLM searches. And maybe not just providing information about your drug alone, but everything in conjunction with your drug that would actually improve their life. Digital health devices, analytic devices, diagnostic, lifestyle. And that just gives us so much richness to think about the future of LLM search because that's where the patients are going. I think that's important. And then, think about it from a pain point perspective and think about it from a human perspective. Like I just mentioned, a pain point for me right now is my health records are all over the world. So I have to go and find them for new doctors here in the US. That's frustrating. So how could pharma actually solve that problem for patients, right? They're busy and they need to be in control of their health. And I think in the example of the one that I gave with regards to the pharmacy out of stock data science model, in that case, how it helped the patient is the patient was able to go into the pharmacy and get the medication the day that they went in versus going in, finding out the medication's out of stock. Then they have to repeat trips, right? So that's a frustrating pain point.
It's convenience part as well.
Yeah, convenience is also part of it.
You know what? That's really nice to sort of bring it home to the patient again, and I think we need to do more and more of that because it's so easy to get lost in discussions around tariffs and policy and MFN and what the FDA is doing and where we're going to go with certain things. I think if we try and bring it back to the things that we can control as an industry, where should our focus efforts be? It's always with the patient, right? And I know a lot of senior people in pharma who will turn around and categorically say that they could have had a different career. They could have been in VCs, or they could have been in hedge funds, or they could have done, something else with their life, but they chose to be in pharma simply on the basis that, they want to make that difference. And I guess the other things was I think it was one from Laura as well that came in, which was specifically around where did we go with this? I believe it was I would love to hear more from you on building trust part, right? Like going back to that trust. How do you build trust? So this is the how now. I guess we've covered the sort of strategic element of what you mean by that. I would love to get into that practicality. This is like Alyssa's moment, right? This is how you build trust. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just simplify it to two things. One, make decisions always in the interest of your patient consumer, right? What do they really think? What's really going to improve their life? Or are you making decisions that are going to damage, that experience that they're getting from you? So if you're always making choices in their best interest, and then you're confirming it, even better, right? Why aren't we asking them? Is this something that would improve your life or something that's interesting to you, removing a pain point? The second is just being radically transparent. Let's not hide the AI. let's be transparent about it. So internally, we need to define how we're using it for our brand. This is different for everyone. But externally, then just communicate it plainly. I think that organizations and brands that are more transparent, even if they're in the wrong, always end up longer term in a better spot than if they hide or are ruining that trust and not being authentic to that relationship that they've built.
Yeah, and I also believe you build trust with likeness, right? There's an element of, going back to the original question there from Michael as well, which is specifically around using Gen AI to build that trust. And I guess my example is, translation, right? This is a key thing, right? If you want to be able to communicate specifically with patients, you should be speaking to them in their own language, and that can also help foster that trust, right? Whether that's in Spanish, in English, in Arabic, and Urdu, Albanian, for example, here in the UK, which is a big language. There's lots of those opportunities. I think technology now is seemingly so good at this that we should be culturally able to connect as well, right? Like, oh my God, look, they're the next tagline, culturally connect. But the idea is that it's always been content that connects, right? So, but it's more about that. It's how do we find ways and means of being able to build that trust, brick by brick, if you like, in terms of the language. Because I'll give you a real example. My mother's a patient, right? And she likes to go in and annoy her GP. I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but there's an element of when he communicates with her, he's able to speak in her language. Because English is not her first language, so that builds so much trust with that particular doctor. Can we now take that as pharma and amplify it? Using Gen AI. So it's just a thought, right? It's like, how do you do it? I think there's technologies everywhere. I know a big pharma company using the likes of Synthesia. We're trying to push that here with like 𝘊𝘰𝘯𝘵, with the AI. But it's more a mindset. How do you want to be able to build that trust, and how do you want to connect? So even though the question was super simplistic from Laura, I think it's got a lot of depth in the way you've just answered it, and hopefully I've added a little bit of my own experience to it.
Yeah, Gaurav, I couldn't agree more, because if you're really making decisions in the best interest of your consumer patient, you would make sure they feel comfortable to build that relationship and that trust. And that does usually require speaking in the same language, because people are able to better express themselves in their own language. And I think it goes back to, many of the customer service touch points that we interact with every day. When it's a chat bot and it's not a good one, and then if you ask for a human and they don't give you a human, even more frustrating. I was recently messaging Apple about my new AirPods, which do have translation, by the way. I haven't tried it out yet. I'm excited to try it out.
Okay.
Maybe that's something we could use next time we see each other.
But there's our next international trip. Let's just find, I don't know, we go to Dubai or something, and you can learn Arabic.
Yeah. One of these conferences coming up, right? And immediately Apple puts you with a direct agent. So they know, right? Because they're really consumer oriented. They have the consumer at the heart of what they're deciding to do. So we need to always think like that. It's a mindset shift.
Yeah. I think this is the latest, right? And I think it's called Nano something as well. Very similar to like Nano Banana and stuff, right? But Apple have trained their latest model on real life imagery, but they took Google's technology in partnership. So this is what it shows. You can work cross collaboratively for a bigger effort, right? So think about Apple and Google working together. So it is possible. And using that sort of Gemini technology, they've actually managed to use real pictures, right, to help to get a realism around their future models when it comes to image generation or when it comes to video generation. So that's massive. That includes things like, ability to look at shadow. And if you're a photographer, things like chromatic aberration, all these things, again, super, super focused on their core values, right? Like, we don't need to be knocking out a feature every 30 seconds, or we don't need to, we want to make generational change, and then suddenly they're off on their bank of assets of whatever they've built up over all these years. So that to me is really interesting, where pharma could potentially learn to collaborate even with competitors better. And I see that with things like maps, when everybody comes together Even Evidence Life Sciences next week when I'm in Zurich, we've got Amgen there, Boehringer, Teva, Roche, just Viatris, so many companies all in the same room sharing around medical affairs. I think there needs to be an element of that within our industry as well. It's not a competitive advantage per se, just because you know how to use Copilot and so do I. It's actually what's right for the patient, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. There is an opportunity to have more cross-industry, main priorities and leadership aligned on those across. And in the spirit of better serving the patient, again, it's not your drug versus another. It's your drug plus diagnostic device plus a digital health platform plus a med device plus over the counter. Like, it's not just your drug in a silo with that one condition. So we do need to collaborate because the patient is collaborating with all of many companies for their health. So yeah, that's a brilliant point.
Yeah, I think we're spending so long on answering these questions. It's like a whole Q&A just on one person's poll question. I might have to like stop it right at one day. But let's just move on to Sarah's one. I think Sarah's one was really the one that a lot of people have been asking me as well when they're walking around, right? And the practical tools, right, for transformation and adoption. And this is very much actually, I'm almost willing to hand over the baton here and say, you're the queen of this. So the practical tools for transformation and adoption, right? There's like this toolkit that the basics of how we do these things. Maybe if I'm happy for you to name drop some tools that you find useful, which aren't your traditional ChatGPT, etc. I'll do the same. But this is a really pertinent question from Sarah Lambert. Sarah Lambert, I'm going to get this right? Pronunciations is not my thing.
Yeah, this is right. Thanks, Sarah, for the question. Yes, exactly. And when I see the word tools, I don't just think tech. I think practical frameworks or ways of thinking. And so this is something everyone's struggling with, right? So in the industry, only 4 or 5% are recognizing financial value, meaning they think they've made it with AI. Right. The rest of us are stuck in early to late pilot mode. And so everyone's struggling with this gap going from, we know we need to do it. And then how do we do it? And how do we execute it well to bring the company value to improve lives, of course. And so there's a couple factors here to unpack. One, each culture is different. So your C-suite or your senior leaders may or may not be super active in driving AI transformation. Doesn't mean you don't stop what you're doing with you and your team and your peers. Obviously, if C-suite's involved, it goes faster. Practically, what I do is equip an organization with early adopter champions across brands, across markets. And if you are able to drive that change and to identify those champions, to bring them together to drive the change, like we were just talking about in the industry, they're going to surface up the use cases. They're going to test out the tools, and they're going to give you feedback on a more centralized strategy. So I think champions play a huge role in disseminating the practical tools and how to use AI. So that's super important. I think too, you need to give them the responsible AI guidelines. Again, if no one above you is creating it, create it for yourself, create it for your organization, and then disseminate to your peers, to your organization, to your team, and start using them. I think what's happening is a lot of organizations are developing these guidelines up here, but then no one knows about them.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of stuck. And we need to make sure it's clear what is safe, what is not safe within the digital and data ecosystem of your organization. What I'm seeing also is a clear divide on should you allow external or internal only tools. And in pharma, I've asked that question, I think, in forum, executive forums. It's a 50-50 split. Yeah. So I'd say more centralized companies who have brought in, say, enterprise ChatGPT, they've done a good job, training it to their nuances within the organization. They're a bit more strict on allowing outside tools.
Yeah.
The question to ask is, are they going to use it on their personal computer anyway, right? I think we have to recognize that. With more decentralized organizations, there's been a bit more freedom in the framework. So they may have Copilot, but they aren't blocking every tool. And we can talk about the exact tools that we like, but I think each organization is making a different choice on that part. So The last thing I'll say, and then we can get into the tools itself, the tech tools, is capability building is so key, right? So it's not just, here's a tool, go figure it out. We need to give them specific use cases that are applicable for their function and tell them how to do it, right? And so your champions help you create the use cases. Your AI council's hopefully helping you invest and scale those. But then you need to have a program that goes and says, you're in marketing, here are the top 3 use cases that you should be doing. This is how it's going to benefit you and your customer. And here is the AI stack to help you execute that. So we need to give that direction. Early adopters will go and experiment on their own, but for the majority, we need to give direction on, let's focus on these 3 use cases for your function. This is how you do it, and here's the tech.
Okay. And the heavens have just opened here. So if you're suddenly hearing like torrential rain, that's what's going on in the background. We'll edit it. Right? Like,
just the UK weekend, right? Ready to start, Gaurav. Go out in that rain after the call.
For sure. Sorry, it just kind of threw me off. Like there's a whole wall of rain just came across.
Oh no.
One of the things I was going to say was you're spot on, and it was actually Marco Andre, I think it was this morning, said, or was it yesterday? He turned around and he said this. He said, "You don't learn AI by reading about it. You don't learn AI by following like this sort of governance and guidance around it. You learn AI by doing it, right? And the capabilities piece is incredibly important, right? And it's the whole idea of catch a fish and teach someone to fish, right? Like I'm not going to go into the analogy, but you know what I'm saying. There's a scary part to AI because it's very much sometimes like finance, a lot of acronyms being used, LLM, baby LLMs, MCP, it's not what you think it means. That kind of stuff is really the bit that's getting people. But what I love about what you said is there is a dissemination problem. And there is a global to local dissemination problem. And I've just come from a pharma company advisory piece where we're looking at AI councils, IT security, all of these things which you just don't think about when you're trying to install it at enterprise level. But when you do get into the practicalities of it, you'll be surprised at how many AIs don't pass that first test. I think it was 𝘂𝗶𝘶, right, who said like 77% just fail. Like put them into basic IT security checks, it's done. So if your company has somehow managed to get you an AI tool which is remotely usable, buy them a coffee, buy them a drink, say thank you, because it is so hard to do this bit. And yes, right, absolutely spot on about the ChatGPT. I won't name the 2 companies. One's in Switzerland, one's in Germany. There you go. That's your clues. They both had ChatGPT instances. They both had their first name in front of them, but they were almost identical in the way they'd switched off certain functionalities because of the risk that they, thought. So I think they're moving from like least risk to most risk, but everyone's starting to dip their toe a little bit in there. And I think that's where vendors can come in and help execute really fast experiments like we do in SaaS and go, yeah, this is working. Let's do more of this. This is not working as well. Let's do less of this. This is great. This is our moonshot, but it could take 5 years, but let's at least start that journey. And I think you've been in organizations long enough to know that real change is when you embed the capability, when the leader transfers and delegates that, responsibility of change across the organization, right?
Absolutely. And transformations don't happen in 1 year. If you really want a long-term sustainable transformation, it takes time. And not everyone has the patience to do that properly, including the investment in capability building. That's why it's one of the core drivers of the human algorithm change management framework. And I think we've seen so many data points from McKinsey, from World Federation of Advertising, that organizations that invest in capability actually are more successful, right, in the long term, and they're thinking long term. So I think spot on.
Yeah. And I was with a friend of mine, Sabina, from _Air, and she was at Reuters recently, and she gave us a quick question as well. I think just before jumping on here, she said, AI ownership, and I'm kind of just paraphrasing here, AI ownership in pharma, centralized or decentralized, who should take the responsibility? Now, this is a $1 million question, right? Like, Not who should take the investment, but who should take that responsibility of the centralization and the decentralization?
And this question, Sabina, thank you for the question. This has been asked about every transformation. AI is the new hot transformation, but we've tackled this in marketing transformations that I've led, digital transformations that I led. It's never going to cease being a question. It's an excellent one. Here's what I've seen work, and from my perspective, right now, let's understand every organization's culture is made up differently. So Apple is very centralized. And so the local markets, the local organizations don't have as much decision making and strategy. That's why the Apple brand globally looks identical.
Yeah.
Amazon looks very different in different countries. It's very decentralized. I can tell you, I've lived in 3 countries. The experience was very different. And that's a decentralized model. So you have to take that into consideration with your centralized, decentralized decision making. Now, I think there's a balance that you can strike. First, you need to have someone own it. You're absolutely right. So you can't have, everyone should take their part in it. But at the end of the day, you need an AI council with cross-functional membership at a high level of leadership with decision-making rights. And one person in that group ultimately will have to make a choice. So I think frequently in pharma, we try to have collaborative choice making, which is ideal. But in the reality, you need to have one decision maker and many contributors and an approver, a leader for the project, et cetera. What I'd like to see, and I'll throw this idea out here, I've heard about this in some tech leader podcasts, I'd like to see a rotational decision maker in that AI council. So it's not always IT or commercial or R&D or legal, it rotates. And so, of course, everyone has a strong contributor, but I think that we should rotate it because everyone should be owning it at the end of the day. So that's one thought. Then with regards to decentralized, centralized, you're not going to change the whole culture with an AI transformation. So some things just need to stay in place. But I think a good balance is something like a hub and spoke model, right? Where you've got some centers of excellence. They're looking outside what's best in class for examples, what's outside the industry, inside the industry. They're making big enterprise decisions on scaling investments, and they're setting the standards for responsible AI with feedback coming in from those champions, coming from that extended network. So it's a two-way communication. It's not central over here by themselves. And then the hub, the spokes coming off the hub have very strong ownership of how to execute those use cases, design new use cases. So you have to have an agreement on that scope of control in the local markets of the brands, and then at the AI council at the senior level. But I think it's a partnership. I really do, because you can't both add really different, distinct perspectives to success for your company and for your patient.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think the idea of a rotating chair, when I looked into the Tech 100, I'm a partner of a company called Relay2AI, right, which we've got Salesforce as a client, Abbott, etc. And what's interesting about it is this, that Alex, who's the CEO, is in the Tech 100, CEOs list, but there's a Tech 100 female list as well. And what I would love to see is a combination of those two lists starting to think about becoming rotating chairs within the organization, because I believe there is a whole element of that level of almost absolute leadership, right? Like you're bringing the best of everyone together onto that council. And because the rotating chair works so well in European Union, for example, you have a rotating chair and whoever's heading up the EU at any given point. I think that's the sort of model that I love the idea of. And that's actually quite revolutionary. I don't think anybody's come on a podcast with me and actually had the bravery to turn around and say, actually, we don't need one person to make the decision here. This is not a hierarchy on AI. This is, this is a collective piece of how you grow, right? And I think this is interesting. I would love to pick this conversation with Minal Ali as well, who's one of the top creators in UAE. And she's starting her podcast, and it's all about how you bring the best of both together. There's so much knowledge within MIT, within NYU, within Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. We go to the universities of Shanghai, wherever it is. I think it's a collective mix of that It's very hard to build an AI council which is just tech only, speaks in
Mhm.
acronyms, and one which is just business only and speaks in commercial numbers. There's something here to get as many people around the table collectively as we can. I'm going to come into the final couple of questions and then maybe sort of hand over to you, because I know you've got some fantastic ideas and giveaways for the listeners as well, who want to carry on this journey with you, right? So I think was it Nate who said, again, and I'm a massive fan of the amygdalic response, right, to AI, which is fear. So how do you move from like fear to optimism with AI? And this is really pertinent from the conversations I'm having with companies like Novo Nordisk and Nestle,
Mhm.
who see their jobs being impacted because there's been discussions around, AI usage, efficiency gains, shareholder market value, tariffs, whatever it may be. There's an uncertainty, there's a fear, and that fear comes through on the AI front as well.
Yeah. Nate, thank you for the question. It's a age-old question as well. I think with any transformation, especially with just tech and digital, the fear that I see it's well more than anything I've seen in the past with regards to any change globally or within organizations. The number one thing is our leaders need to create a culture of psychological safety. That's the number one thing, because unless they feel safe in any front, they're not going to experiment and feel okay failing and sharing their learnings. And great leaders create a culture of psychological safety so that their team will test and learn and fail and share the learning so everyone gets better. Easier said than done, of course. But again, if that's not the culture of your company, don't wait. Create your own culture within your own remit, your own organization, and try to influence up, right? I think when you then start having the use cases of those successes and you as a leader share it more broadly, so you're vulnerable, and then you share that up the chain and what that failure led to as the next step and the next use case and how it was successful and connected to the P&L, connected to patient outcomes. That's the language of executives and leaders, right? Yep. So if you can connect back to the P&L, patient outcomes, the big macro KPIs, that's how you tell your story. And it starts with all of us as leaders creating a culture of psychological safety within reason, right? We have to get our jobs done, but you need to make sure you've got some time sectioned off for your people, for your organization to do that. And then you create optimism out of a movement. It's those early adopters running successful use cases and then showing others how to do it. And again, it's not an overnight exercise. This takes, in my opinion, I think transformations usually take 2 or 3 years to be done really, really, really well. And the culture shift, the mindset shift is one of the more difficult ones, which is what this question is referring to.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I was speaking to a friend of mine, 𝘊𝗵𝘁, who I think he said to me in his 25-year-old career, there's probably been like 22 restructures, right? And
Wow.
and sometimes that's insane when you think about how pharma operates, in terms of 5-year, 7-year plans, once you've got the indications sorted and the FDA approval's done. So I think change is a constant. That's a given. I also feel that AI is going to reward the early adopters, and I think we're seeing an element of that, with the Eli Lilly discussion that I've just shared as well with NVIDIA. That is the first time where R&D is also, going to be impacted with AI as well. Lots of molecules being developed with algorithms as opposed to labs. These things are changing fundamentally the way we operate. And the fear will start coming in when I think the value destruction is higher than the value creation in people's eyes. My only advice, if any, is to try and upskill. Utilize the resources that we have available, that Alyssa has available, Marco, anybody in the industry who's willing to share. Network Pharma TV has a huge amount of content on these topics, and really find yourself from a position of confidence that you can go, right, you know what, I kind of get AI, but it's actually a tool to help me to, deliver the patient impact that I want. So Alyssa, I've kind of already sold it. So this is your opportunity just to tell our audience how you can yourself potentially help and if there is, if there's anything that you see as outstanding best practice that other people should adopt.